My name is Peter Tully, and my story is not a happy one. I protect a land that is brimming with horrors behind your dizziest nightmares. The truth of this region is a secret safeguarded by a few hardened souls. It is our duty to shield the world from the twisted terrors within this place. I have seen things that eyes cannot discern, and I have learned things that minds cannot fathom. After 20 years of this unending hell, I am ready to share my story. It is by no means a short tale. And this is only the very beginning. When I moved to Scotland in the spring of 2004, I was a young man. I left the Metropolitan Police Force behind, and I accepted a position as a park ranger in the Scottish Highlands. Maria and I were hoping to start a family. It was a clean slate. Are you sure this is what you want? Maria asked. Of course, I said. Are you? Well, it's a bit late for both of us to be asking these questions now. Maria laughed, motioning at the window. We're already in Scotland. I smiled. I know, but you can always say the word. We could hop in that car and drive back to London. I don't care about London, she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. I care about only you. I kissed her forehead. This won't be like the city, Maria. It's peaceful out here. Every job comes with challenges, Peter, she said. Are you ready to jump straight into work? You can take more time to recover. I love you, I said, tightly squeezing my wife. But I'm ready for this. We were so naive. The Highlands is a region of Scotland known around the world, and yet it is not truly known by anyone. At least, not this particular piece of haunted woodland, a location that I will not disclose. The Highlands is a very vast, sprawling region, and I pray nobody finds my park. You would be wise to never try. When I arrived at the village's local pub on my induction day, I was met with steely glares from the establishment's handful of early morning drinkers. It was the sort of standoffish demeanor that newcomers often receive from locals, especially an Englishman in a Scottish village. Ancient prejudices never really die, do they? Over here, Peter, the man hoarsely bellowed. I turned to see Matthew Wright, the old man I recognized from my job interview. It had only been a month since our online call, and yet the fellow had somehow aged 10 years or so. He must have been in his late 60s at the time, and I could only assume it could be stress-induced aging, the result, most likely, of Matthew fulfilling part duties, given the previous ranger's disappearance 3 months prior. That was the real reason for Maria's concern regarding the new job, the murky circumstances surrounding the opening of the position in the first place. Hello, Matthew, I said, sitting opposite the weathered man. How are you? I am well, he replied in a soft, gruff voice. Are you and your wife settled? I nodded. Yes, this village is idyllic, Matthew coarsely interrupted. Quaint, tranquil, beautiful. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure as to how I should respond to the sudden, curt remark. There is truth to that, the old man said. But this haven is the tip of the safety atop the iceberg. Beneath the surface, things look quite different. I'm not sure I understand, I awkwardly replied. I wouldn't expect you to understand, Matthew said, pausing for a moment. You impressed me in your interview. There was a reason that I asked so many questions about your time on the force. I wasn't looking for an ordinary person. I was looking for somebody who had already stared horror in the eyes. I stifled a gulp, involuntarily rose to the top of my throat. Are you okay? Matthew asked, possibly noticing that the color had drained from my face. I nodded, composing myself. Yes, I'm fine. I'm thinking about the woman who held the position before me. Shirley Pond, Matthew said. I understand your hesitations, Peter. Who would want to fill the position of a missing person? Well, I won't lie to you. These foods are dangerous. The job comes with risks. I know, I said. You've warned me. I hadn't divulged a piece of information to Maria. as I knew she was already uneasy about me returning to work after the nervous breakdown in London. "I did," Matthew said, sighing. "But, well, what do you imagine might have happened to Shirley? What's the worst thing you've imagined?" I frowned at the horrid nature of the question. I imagined that she'd either tumbled over a mountain's cliff edge or met her demise at the hands of an animal. Still, there are very few animals in the Highlands. A boar could have attacked a park ranger, but it was highly unlikely. "Here's the thing, Peter," Matthew said, seeing that I had no answer. "Your darkest fantasy does not compare to the true nature of the forest. And though I want to desperately tell you what you will find in the woods, I will not bother." "Why?" I asked, frowning. Matthew sighed. "You wouldn't believe me, boy. You simply would not believe me." "Try," I said. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "You would laugh in my face and leave." He said a lot without saying much, and I started to piece things together in my brain. The man, no doubt, believed in cryptids, monsters, the boogeyman, perhaps the old Ness herself hiding in the loch. Being an English city boy with a rational approach to life, I didn't believe in such things. "What's out there? Some sort of creature?" I asked. Matthew eyed me for a few seconds, perhaps searching for the faintest hint of smile on my face, any sign of mockery. And I was certain I would be fired before I even started. "There are those who know what lie in the woods," Matthew said, nodding his head at a couple of the drinkers in the pub. "They have seen things. Seeing is the only way to make a person truly believe." "Well, why didn't you hire a local then?" I asked. "Look at us, Peter. We're old. Too old. And I couldn't bring myself to ask our children. But a stranger, well, that seemed..." Matthew suddenly paused, contemplatively scratching his face. "You know, I think I've rushed into this. Perhaps you said it yourself," I interrupted, feeling the job opportunity slipping from my grip. "Nobody else is in a fit state for this position. It has to be me." Matthew suddenly slammed his fist onto the table. The entire pub fell silent. Nobody moved a muscle. Nobody made a sound. I waited for the man to find his calm and collected disposition again. "Peter," he eventually said, "you don't even know what's in those woods." "No," I agreed, "but I know who I have to redeem. I just have to do this, Matthew. And as you said, I won't believe until I see it for myself." "And even then you won't believe," Matthew whispered. I smiled victoriously. "So does that mean I have the job?" "Only if you accept one thing," he said. "Go on," I replied. Matthew sighed. "Once you take this path, you cannot leave it." I nodded in acceptance. I'm not sure whether this man viewed me as courageous or moronic. Maybe a mixture of two things, I imagine. Whatever the case, Matthew stopped resisting. He begrudgingly drove me from the village to the watchtower, a wooden structure that loomed over the mountains, which would become my domain. "The Highlands of the Dead," Matthew said, as we clambered out of the car. "That's an ominous name," I responded. Matthew sighed. "Dreadful things have happened here. We've had our fair share of tragedies over the decades." "The school teacher?" I said, vaguely remembering a certain news story. "Yes," Matthew said. "What he did was unthinkable." I nodded, strolling toward the staircase at the foot of the watchtower. "You stopped prying me for information about the woods," the man noted. I shrugged. "I know you won't tell me, so what's the use?" I just knew that you would run," he said. "Not from fear, most likely. You would view this job as a farce. You would think of me to be some sort of crackpot." "I already think that," I thought, stifling a laugh. Matthew gave me a rundown of the duties that I would be expected to perform. He was searching for things to say, drawing out the initiation period, possibly hoping that I would change my mind. Eventually, the man sighed heavily. "Right, Well, I suppose I'd better go, Matthew said. I nodded. It's going to be fine. Okay, he replied uncertainly. There were no parting words of wisdom from the old man, a man who perhaps was not really that old, more hardened by the things he had experienced, as I would soon learn. During the first few hours of my shift, I admired the gorgeous vistas from a sheltered room atop the watchtower. Stunning, jagged terrain stretched to the horizon. Lakes glistened in the afternoon sun. Luscious green pastures and rocky hillsides lay beyond my serene pine tree forest. It was a place of outstanding beauty. Highlands of the Dead felt like a cruel name to me. It was around 8 in the evening that the sun began to set, and in the soft orange glow of the day's diminishing light, I saw something peculiar. About a mile in the distance, the forest appeared to be moving. After hurriedly lifting my binoculars to my eyes, I saw that the trees had been felled, and the building had inexplicably appeared in the clearing. What the? I started, immediately grabbing my things and sprinting out of the door. By the time I'd reached the bottom of the watchtower staircase, the light of the day was almost entirely gone. I turned on my torch and began to navigate through the towering trees which had seemed so minute and manageable from the height of the watchtower. On the ground, however, I felt small and fragile. This only worsened as night came and a heavy blanket of darkness engulfed me. Come on, I told myself, stop it. You're becoming a local already, believing in ghosts and demons. I blamed the tragedy of the school teacher for the superstitious nature of the townsfolk. Trauma can do awful things to a person's psyche, and the man in question had done things beyond awful to the village. I'd read about it in the paper several years prior. Arnold Haversham took 3 children into the woods, committed unspeakable acts, and then hanged himself from a tree. Nothing supernatural there. Untoward, but unfortunately very human in nature. That was what I repeated to myself as I walked further into the woods, further from the warmth and the comfort of the watchtower. But when I reached the clearing, I could no longer rationalize anything. A building had emerged from the underworld. It had torn through grass and dirt, splintering the surrounding trees. No felling or man-made construction. The building, sprouting from nothingness, had created itself. And when I realized that I recognized the structure, I stumbled backwards in horror. It was the village school. A moss-covered, ghoulish representation of the building was lurking in the depths of the Scottish Highlands at the dead of the night. How? I whispered, shaking. Matthew had been right. The horrors of the woods had seen to be believed. Had to be seen to be believed. But I hadn't even seen the true horrors yet. A scream pierced the night. I tumbled to the ground, managing to hold on to my torch. The haunting pain sound came from the belly of the demonic building, a building that had clearly just risen from hell itself. And yet, defying all sensibility, I found myself clambering to my feet and walking towards the ajar front doors. Redemption. It had been served on a platter, a chance to right my wrongs, a chance to forget London. I tore the splintered doors open, almost pulling one of them from its hinges. Then, stepping over the bumpy ground that had risen through the cracks of the tiled floor, I shone my torch into the great abyss before me. I was lighting an overgrown, long-forgotten corridor. The apocalyptic hallway was lined with rusty lockers coated in vines. The tiles crumbled beneath my feet, giving way to dirt and rocks. And as I disappeared deeper into the paranormal building, I began to regret my decision. But just like Matthew and the other villagers, trauma was guiding me blindly forwards. Help! A distorted voice screeched from the darkness. I followed the sound down to a corridor to the right, finding that my torch seemed to be struggling to permeate the thick shadows of the halls. The school's atmosphere was slanted, disjointed. There was a blackness beyond comprehension within these walls, and there was a silence which gave way to the sound of my heartbeat. please," a girl cried. It came from a room at the end of the corridor, classroom 11A. Steadying my torch in my trembling hand, I took tentative steps towards the doorway, finally hearing something. A scratching sound in an otherwise silent building. Free hand pressed against the door. I gently pushed it open. It revealed a tiny box with 3 chairs and a whiteboard on the far wall, but there was nobody inside. There was only the ever-loudening sound of the scratching from above. "Hello?" I called. The scratching stopped, and all that remained, yet again, was the sound of my heartbeat, an ever-quickening rhythm. Without warning, the ceiling tiles gave away. I yelled in terror as 3 bodies came tumbling down. I fell through the open doorway and looked up at the terrifying scene from the ground. 3 school children, 2 boys and a girl, swayed from the nooses which led into a blackened void beyond the vanished ceiling. But these were no corpses. The children had hollow eye sockets burrowing deeply into their faces. Their gaping mouths revealed black chasms to match their eyes, and their skin was shallow. It scarcely clung to their skeletons, much as their tattered uniforms barely clung to their bodies. But most horribly, their necks were elongated to a couple of feet in length. With every swing, their terribly long bodies lightly brushed the tiles of the floor. Help. My eyes shot to the dead girl, whose empty, lifeless mouth twitched to utter that ghastly plea. Body frozen, I hoisted myself up, and turning on my heel, I could hear moans of agony from behind me as I sprinted along the lightless corridors, struggling to navigate my way out of the school. Everything looked different. I was caught in an ever-changing maze. But when I finally found the school's main entryway, the ground began to quake. The ceiling above slowly descended, and as dirt filled the school entrance, I realized the spectral building was sinking. I sprinted toward the exit, desperately trying to maintain my footing on the rocky surface beneath my feet. I could feel the fresh air spilling through the doorway. My brain was waking from a trance. Why did I even come in here? I wondered. The haunted place had clearly wormed its way into my brain, but I was almost free of it. And then, as I crawled through the half-sunken doorway, something clutched my ankle. "You belong," a sinister voice shrieked. I turned to face a hand rising from the crevice in the dirt. A near fleshless, ghoulish limb slithered upwards, and when its face emerged, the blood drained from my own. Like those of children, it was rotten. Barely shallow eye sockets and a blackened mouth. A mouth that opened wide, unleashing a deep, unwieldy cry. And as I looked upon the unliving thing, the mind filled blanks. I remembered the picture from the news article, Arnold Havisham. The building was plummeting into the ground below. The abomination from a hellish dimension was trying to take me into the hollow. I dug my fingernails into the dirt, desperately scrambling to stay in the world above. And then I saw something. Illuminating the blackened hole, I could faintly distinguish another pair of rotting hands, slender but just as hauntingly unearthly. The brittle fingers coiled around the schoolteacher's inhuman face, and the man growled ferociously as an unseen creature separated him from me. The brittle fingers coiled around the schoolteacher's inhuman face, and the man growled ferociously as an unseen creature separated him from me. As my ankle finally slipped out of the Haversham's grasp, I jumped to my feet, watching the ground seal above the haunted school and its inhabitants. The forest suddenly seemed so peaceful, but it had lost all of its beauty. It only had taken one night for me to understand the disgruntled man. Not stopping to catch my breath, I ran back to the watchtower. Then I sat in my office shivering until Matthew arrived, 5 in the morning. He saw my pale face and smiled pitifully. "I tried to warn you," he said. "How is it real?" I whispered. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. "The schoolteacher," I replied. Matthew Wright raised an inquisitive eyebrow and widened his eyes. "Havisham?" "Yes." "Isn't that what you saw?" He shook his head. "Peter, there are many things in this forest, and none of them—" "I quit," I interrupted. "But you knew that already." "Wait," Matthew said sternly. "What did I tell you?" "I don't care," I said, heading to the door. The old man tightly grabbed my arm as I passed him in the doorway. "You will," he said. "Once you take this path, you cannot leave it." "Just watch me," I replied. "If you try to leave the Highlands," Matthew continued, refusing to release my arm, "you join the undead." "What are you talking about?" I asked. Matthew leaned closer and whispered, "You belong to the woods now. We all do." I stared into the old man's eyes and saw for a second the same hollow cavities that had eyed me from Arnold Haversham's face. Then I remembered the haunting and his word. "You belong." "You're lying," I said. "Then why haven't we left?" Matthew asked. "Knowing what we know, do you think we choose to stay here?" "You're crazy," I replied, wrenching my arm free. "That's why." Matthew followed me down the staircase as I hurried away from him. "Think of Maria," he said. "What does this have to do with her?" I barked, stopping, turning to face the man. "Everyone in this village is entwined with the Highlands," he explained, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I tried to warn you, Peter." "No, you didn't," I said, snarling as I squared up to the old man. "You lured me to this cursed village. You tricked me into agreeing to do this job. Your warnings were meaningless. You knew I would view you as nothing more than a crazy old man telling stories. You knew exactly what you were doing." "Aye," Matthew replied. "Maybe, but I had to do it for the village. We need a ranger, and I'm falling apart at the seams." "Do it for the village?" I cried, laughing maniacally. "What use am I against the horrors of that magnitude?" Matthew gripped both of my shoulders tightly and spoke coldly. "The woods needs souls. That is our purpose. We sacrifice our souls to it every night. We give it a piece of ourselves. And in return, it spares the village. It spares everyone." I paused. The man's worry and worn face finally made sense. "Everyone except us," I whispered. Matthew nodded. "Yeah, everyone except us. So I kill myself slowly, like you? That's my lot in life?" "You save the village," he said. "That's your lot in life." I wish I could offer a happy ending. 20 years later, at the age of 42, find myself becoming the now deceased Matthew Wright. I have assumed his role as a withered, worn-out man, a man who, on a nightly basis, sacrifices himself to the Highlands of the dead. And why? To protect Maria, to protect our son, Henry, to protect everyone. I strive to free myself of this prison, though there are things I have learned over the past 2 decades. The full truth of these words is still a mystery to me. Still, there is more to my story, and this is only the beginning.